So we continue to explore the holy habit of Christian fellowship. As we home in now on a passage in the Gospels, it's a chat between Jesus and his disciples on the night before he died. So they are having a fellowship meal together. And what do they chat about on this fellowship meal? One of my favorite pastimes, gardening. And in particular, viticulture, the culture of vines. Vines have perhaps been the most useful, important of the cultivated plants in the history of mankind. Because we know from vines come grapes, from grapes comes sweet juice, and from sweet juice comes, of course, wine. As the psalmist said, Psalm 104, one of my favorite verses in the Bible, wine that maketh glad the heart of man. Well, that's a bit sexist, isn't it? I would add, from my limited experience, that applies to women too, and certainly my 6 daughters. But, nothing is mentioned in this chat between Jesus and his disciples about wine. No, it's all about the plant, the vine. But why the vine? Was it simply a plant so well known to the disciples that he could just easily hang a bit of his teaching on the branches? Or was it more than that? Did it perhaps conjure up other images for them? Did it stimulate their minds to branch out? Certainly the disciples would have been familiar with one particular image, the image of the vine representing the nation of Israel. Just think about it. It's good to think about it on the day when the 4 home counties won at rugby. Just think about this. The rose is the emblem of England. The shamrock is the emblem of Ireland. The thistle is the emblem of Scotland. And the leek. The leek, which brings tears to my eyes, is the emblem of Wales. All 4 of those plants you'll find on your £1 coin. They're linked together by the royal crown. Look at your £1 coin when you go home. It's a sign of our unity and our fellowship within the United Kingdom. Long may it reign. In the same way, the vine was the national emblem of Israel, and it was a vine that appeared on their Israeli old coins. So when Jesus said, I am the vine, the true vine, he said, bells would have been ringing in the disciples' ears. The ears would have pricked up like meerkats in the desert. They would have been listening to him because they recognized the emblem. And they would have thought, is he referring here to the nation, Israel perhaps? Maybe his desire to have a new spiritual Israel? Or was he in some way referring to his relay fellowship with the disciples, all linked together? They must have thought, who knows? God knows, Jesus knows. But of course, one thing they could be clear, for Jesus spells it out to them. He said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. So where did that leave the disciples? And more importantly, where does it leave us today? Well, we, like the disciples, are the branches. And very important branches too, because remember, it's the branches that bear the fruit. And just as the branches must remain bound into the tree to receive the sap of life, so Jesus says we must abide in him so that we too may receive life in all its abundance. Yes, in the vine, in the branches, we have this image of true fellowship with one another, and we are part of a fellowship that finds its sap and energy in Christ himself. After all, he is the true vine. Jesus spells it out, this unity with him, this fellowship with him and with each other, and he says it's so important. Yes, he says, whoever remains in me and me in him bears fruit in plenty, for cut off from me you can do nothing. The terminal bud on the side branch of the vine has no problem receiving its life-giving requirements through the sap flowing up from the roots, provided it remains attached. That's the call for us today, to remain attached to the vine, which is Christ himself. What Jesus was saying was that there had to be that unity, that continuing fellowship between himself and his disciples, and that includes you and me. Just like the continuity there is in the vine. Side shoots to main stem to the roots, a network through which common life flows. God, you're looking heavy this morning. Are you hot? This is a picture, a perfect Christian fellowship in which love can flow to the Father, from the Father to the Son, and from the Son to the disciples, and so on to each one of us. And Jesus says, abide in me, and I in you, abide in my love. But you know, isn't it, it's difficult for us as human beings, because we're not divine. It's hard for us as human beings to remain grafted into the vine 24 hours a day. But of course, Jesus understands, and he gives us free will. We're indeed free to go our own way, to do our own thing. Yes, we can deliberately take decisions to break away from the main plant, to cut ourselves off from this beautiful Christian fellowship. Or maybe we're tempted to do other things with our free will that end up fracturing our relationship with God and our Christian fellowship. You know the things that separate you from God, as I do myself. Of course, we may not break away completely, just get caught up with things of this world that stop us from bearing spiritual fruit. You know, the sort of fruit that St. Paul speaks about in 1 Corinthians. We know it well. He talks about love and joy and peace, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, and so on and so on. The fruits of the Spirit. These are spiritual fruits we who are grafted into the vine should strive to bear. But of course we fail. We don't always produce these good fruits in abundance. I know where I fall short. I'm sure you do too. But this is where the gardening bit becomes important, because in gardening, and Lynn loves doing this, she frightens me in the garden when she gets out with her pruning, she is. But pruning, she knows it's important, and you know the bits of your life that are not quite right. Aspects in your life, in my life, that hinder our relationship with God and with the Christian fellowship. Jesus just says, prune them out. Prune them out. That's what gardeners do. They find the bad, unproductive bits of the vine and prune them out. That produces fresh, new growth. Jesus says, do thou likewise, and you'll find it life-giving. But let's now just go back to that comment by Jesus to his disciples, to those in the fellowship with him when he walked the earth. Those words, lovely words, he said to them, abide in me and I in you, abide in my love. Jesus wanted to make it absolutely clear to the disciples and to each one of us here today. He says, I have spoken this so that your joy may be in you and your joy can be complete. This is my commandment. Love one another as I have loved you. Love one another. A fabulous commandment. And of course, if we can truly obey it, then we will indeed be fully grafted into the vine. We're not talking about a superficial sort of love here, but a deep, enduring love, the sort that St. Paul speaks about over and over again. He says, love one another, love that never gives up, love that's patient, kind, endures all things, never gives up, resilient, powerful love, not slushy, sentimental stuff. And he says to us, as we surge onwards in this Christian fellowship, striving to bear spiritual fruit, he says, love one another as I have loved you. This sounds as if it's getting a bit heavy. You're all looking shell-shocked. Let me tell you a story. There's a story of an eminent baby specialist who had a standard treatment for frail newborn babies who were failing to gain weight. When he came to the baby's chart as he walked around the ward each day, during his daily rounds in the hospital, he invariably scrawled the following directions on the chart for the nurse in attendance. He simply wrote, this baby needs to be loved every 3 hours. This baby needs to be loved every 3 hours. He knew love is powerful stuff. Love is powerful stuff. So how do we express that in our Christian fellowship and thereby obey Jesus' command to love one another? I find it helpful to think about a couple falling in love. Perhaps remember the first time you fell in love with the man or woman of your life. Think about the sequence. The two have to meet. They have to come together and spend time together. Then the two have to communicate with one another, perhaps with words, perhaps with gestures, perhaps eye-to-eye contact, perhaps physical contacts like hugging and kissing and so on. In such ways we communicate our feelings. So you meet, you communicate, and then through all of that you have to learn to serve one another, to be prepared to give of yourself for the sake of your partner. 3 things to allow love to develop: meet, communicate, serve. Jesus isn't talking here, though, about just a relationship between a couple. He's talking here about a field vastly bigger. He's talking about the relationship between individuals in the congregation and the wider community and other countries and the whole world. Meet, communicate, serve one another. That's what he's saying. Love one another as I have loved you. And it's not always easy, is it? As I've said, English, Scots, Irish, Welsh, all together in church, and probably other nationalities as well. Jesus says, love one another. That's my commandment. That's what's needed. Abide in the vine. But we need to do 3 things: meet together, communicate, serve one another. That's far more than just turning up for church on a Sunday morning, isn't it? That's why it's actually quite important to go in for coffee afterwards. Before I forget, I've been told to command you to go out through that door today for coffee, because this one for some reason is blocked off. But that's part of us getting to meet and communicate and get to know one another better. Christian fellowship. And then think of all the other activities that Paul, our vicar, urges us to join in with week by week. Lots of them on the pew sheet. Respond to them. Fellowship, fellowship, fellowship. Meeting together, communicating together. Check them out. Respond to God's prompting to do just that. By coming to do that, you will grow closer together and closer to Christ. Now that is abiding in the vine. I suppose in the end, the buck rests with each one of us as an individual. I want each one of us here today to go away with that personal challenge. Let each one of us here today strive to live out that command to love one another as we fully engage in the fellowship of the church. Meet, communicate, serve within the fellowship. It's time for me to finish. The fruit of the vine is sitting there on the altar. It's crying out for consecration. As you drink it, I pray that you might feel more grafted in to the vine, which is Christ himself. I'll end with a quote from a book that I keep on my bookshelf. It's a simple little booklet. It is a booklet of child's letters to God. Simple little letters from children written to God. It's a short one. It just says, "Dear God, count me in. Signed, your friend Herbie." That's a good one for today, isn't it? If you're grafted in to the vine. Count me in. Amen.